behind the scenes footage, but we do have pictures. So let's take a look at the pictures that we have here. This was a photo shoot that was done in New York City, hosted by American Photo magazine. So as you can see here, we have a backdrop in this beautiful brick building. You can see the frame of the backdrop and the backdrop material itself. All of the sets were staged by American Photo magazine, so these are what we dealt with as we went. But again, because of the pipes and things in the background, there's stuff that we would have to take out as we went. These power supplies, for example, and the piping would have to be taken out if we didn't use backdrops for the individual photographs. Light, some reflectors used in the process as well. Personally, I like to use natural light as opposed to other types of lighting. But we get the backdrop. And here you see the non-natural lighting. We have a little egg crate grid set up over here and a big softbox on the side. Softboxes have a tendency to take the edges away. And so for somebody who has abs, it can soften that. Here we have another. This is back over using a reflector by the window. We've got the white side facing us. The gold side would be the other side of it, and it would add more of a warm lighting. And you can see the daylight is rather harsh. And by putting a reflector in place and catching that light and reflecting it back onto the subject, it adds more warmth to the image. Here we have a young lady. You can see we have the post here with a light over her head, as well as this very large softbox over to the side. At the time, they had a very high megapixel slow processing camera that they were demoing, and you actually had to wait for the image to render on the screen. And she got to spend the entire day basically under all this lighting with the camera in that setup. Again, it was a wonderful setting to have everything in, but some of the models spent a lot of time under some very, very bright lights. I like to use softer lighting and not as much of it, because I don't like to remove all the shadows from the subject as well. Here we're back over having natural light. You can see a gentleman down there taking a photograph. We've got a reflector up here, but we have all this very harsh white natural light on her, it washing out the color and most of the texture of the brick wall behind her, which is a detriment to natural light. As you can see here, when you have a backdrop, it doesn't just stop at the floor. It extends down onto the floor itself, and that is where the subject will stand, or in this case, lay down. Again, the large softbox causing a softening of all of his curves. Again, here we have a grid as well as a large softbox. Now, what the grid gets you is the grid allows that light to be aimed a little bit more. It doesn't throw it out quite as broadly as it does if it was just a straight diffuser at the end of that softbox. But again, you have another backdrop that she's standing on. And you can see another backdrop over there for the next set. There were several setups ready to go with different models for the different settings. To give you an idea of where we were, you can see All Saints here. This is a view out our window. And over here, you can see the Bloomingdale's banner hanging down. So you guys know approximately where we were in a beautiful old brick building that we were in. They had put together for us with all of these models in downtown New York City. And if you want to hear more about the goings-on of the trip for me and what happened there. That'll come out on Thursday on the podcast. Here we have another one. You can see this heavy base and a light above her head. You can actually see that grid underneath the light as well. Anytime you have a light over somebody's head like this, you have to make sure that it's balanced and weighted so that it can't possibly tip over onto the subject, obviously. And again, you can see that the backdrop was in place to give us a little less to have to remove from the piping, but again, it had enough wrinkles in it. This picture shows a LED light that they had set up for us. At the time that we were doing this, LED lighting was just starting out where it was battery powered, making it easier to move. But again, an awful lot of very bright light on her. Here's another setup. We were about to get into the boudoir section of the event, and you can see the very large soft boxes that she had on either side of her and the next model in place down the row. Again, those soft boxes will cause a softening because it diffuses the light. Natural light will make things look much more sharp, which is great if you're shooting men and you want to get their abs and things clean. But if you're just shooting a woman, you probably want something a little softer. And boudoir shoots in and of themselves lend themselves to that very soft lighting. The larger the softbox, the larger the diffusion and the softer the light's going to be on your subject. If you make it too soft, you can always fix that in post. But the larger the softbox is, the more stands you're going to have, and you should have the stands weighted so that you don't run the risk of them toppling over onto your subject. Again, from here, you can see that we've got that bar by her legs. This one, you can see what the environment looked like. And here's another example. We're back over where that young woman was that had all those pictures being taken with that high megapixel camera. You can see that that very large softbox is a very narrow softbox, but you can see there's another light over her head. There's a light over to the side, and there are absolutely no shadows except under her foot. Again, beautiful area to shoot in. Got the big softbox on him, which is softening out the definition of his muscles, which would have to be fixed in post. But we've got that pipe going right behind his knees that has to be taken out in post. So while it's a nice background, kind of, this is definitely an area that would have needed a bunch of backdrops behind all of the subjects, just to make sure that the focus was the subject and not the environment around them. And to cut down on what would have to be removed from that photograph, like this pipe. I'd also pull that crack out, but. So we're back to this other photograph. You can see that there's somebody walking by, but you can see the setups. There's a bed over there for another boudoir shoot on the other side of her. She's posing, but you can see all of the trappings that had to be set up for the different lighting. There was lots of light around. And again, you can see in this case, she's on the floor. The photographers are shooting in from the right-hand side, so they would have the white backdrop behind her. White with blonde, probably not my first choice for that, but you can see all the stands that were in place for the lights and that flare from the light up on the top. Again, it was a great event, but there was just a bit too much light from my perspective for two reasons. One, it gets rid of the shadows. You don't see any shadows around her at all. But the other reason is it's bright for the model or the subject to be in at all times. And not having the shadows, to me, makes it look a little less realistic. And there's so few shadows that if you have any muscle definition, it gets washed out from all that light being focused on you. That, add to that soft diffused light, And if you're a man wanting to show off his physique, or a woman who wants to show off the musculature that you've earned through all those workouts, large, soft lighting like this is not your friend. Going back to this natural light that will cause sharpness in those shadows, maybe a little bit of reflector just to get rid of any extra shadows. But again, having large, bright lights in everybody's face is not appropriate to me. While I do have a couple of LED panels, I don't usually turn them up very high, and I can change the lighting to take care of that reflected gold color to warm it up if I need to. Because if you see, these are very stark white, but I don't believe in having that stark, bright light in everybody's face. Again, on Thursday, because I've moved my podcast to Thursday, we'll talk more of the behind the scenes stuff on this as well, and go over the experience from my perspective of being there as we go through a couple of these more photos again. Again, it was a beautiful area. We had a lot of really nice natural light to shoot with, which is what I prefer to shoot with, is natural light. Anything like this that's too bright and too stark can always be covered up with a sheer material to balance out that lighting and bring back a little of the softness for a boudoir shoot. Or in the case of somebody like him, it allows me to make sure that his muscles are defined and we get that sharpness in the shadows of his abdominals. So it's not something that has to be fixed in post. It's a much more natural image.